so small. You know, look at this, and I will give it to you. Yeah. Sorry, that's all over the place. My papers.
Well, it's been uneven. There's been big complaints by the people who are victims, and there's still much many representations being made by them. Parties specifically say that certain people who were prosecuted was for Johannesburg. Very few. And there's generally been complaints by victims in terms of compensation that haven't been adequate. But otherwise, generally there hasn't been dissatisfaction. So, mixed bag. The people which have gained the most, the victims, are the ones who complain.
Yeah, good to go.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everybody. You're most welcome to Strathmore University. We are very happy to hold our 7th debate since the start of our project about 2 years ago. It was October in 2012 when we began Reporting Kenya, which is a joint project of Institute on Law and Peace Reporting and Wayamo Foundation. Today, like you can see, we already have our panelists here, and the subject is Kenyans Struggle for Justice and Security on the Path to Accountability, or mere window dressing. Like most of you, you know the kind of issues we've been experiencing in Kenya, the Mpeketoni attacks, the terrorist attacks across the country. So it will be very interesting to hear from our panelists what is the best way forward, and also bring out the issues that are affecting the country. You are most welcome. I'll now call Louis Franceschi from the Strathmore Law School.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Strathmore University. And we are very happy to have with us once again Wayamo Communication Foundation and the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, once again coming here to discuss very interesting things. The topic, Kenyan Struggle for Justice and Security on the Path to Accountability, or mere window dressing, is very relevant. A week ago, Nation Media Group organized a roundtable of writers, and the topic was precisely this one, security, what's happening. And they were just asking and picking the brains of all these writers to see what's happening in the country, why is insecurity on the rise. Certainly this topic reminds me of good and bad news. And this brings to my memory the story of a doctor who told the patient one day, look, your leg is very bad, we will have to amputate it, to cut it. Then the doctor cut the leg, and the following day told the patient, well, the operation went very well, I have a bad news and a good news for you. Which one first? Said, well, the bad one. Said, well, I'm afraid I cut the wrong leg. And the good news is that the other leg is improving. So, in a way, the situation in Kenya is perhaps very similar. Okay, what is the good news? Yeah, something seems to be in the cooking pot. Security issues are improving. They say that they will install cameras in town, etc., etc. But at the same time, this is a bad piece of news that we do not know if this is real or window dressing. if I am allowed to say here, although I'm not part of the panel, I had a conversation with the DPP, Keriako Tobiko, a week ago, and his team, and I realized that they are in a real fix. Because all of a sudden they were set up as an office to conduct prosecution, and they do not have the skills, the technical skills. So before the police somehow was involved, now he has the powers, he has the office, and they do not have the skills. Too hard work that is the because of lack of a budget, etc., and the judiciary. And then if anything goes wrong, you are to blame. But you do not have the skills, and they are trying to set up a curriculum and to set up programs to train these prosecutors in a more comprehensive and professional manner. So perhaps this is one of the issues that will come up in the, I will not preempt anything. My job here was very simple, was to thank you for coming, welcome, and to tell Bettina once again, thank you for the great job you are doing. We know you are working with several armed governments, with the DPP's office, the AG's office, the judiciary, trying to press the agenda the government wants to press. That is the agenda, and the people want to press the agenda of security. And what we perhaps have to find is the best way of reaching the targets that have been set. And with this, I welcome you all panelists wholeheartedly for coming today. And without further ado, the floor is yours, Bettina.
Oops, goodness. Thank you very much, Luis. Welcome, everybody. Thanks again also Strathmore University for hosting our 7th debate. Has been 2 years of a very good partnership. Thank you very much for the Institute for War and Peace Reporting and Wayamo, Simon, Chris, Judy, and Michael. And start saying that we really tried to have a balanced panel. We contacted several government representatives from the security sector, the AG's office, trying to get representatives also to sit with us. Unfortunately, nobody agreed to come. So I hope if you feel that the government voice is not heard accordingly, and people in the audience wants to add thoughts and other opinions. The second thing I would like to say at the beginning is the structure. People who have been at our other panels already know we have about 4 questions we are going to ask the panelists. And after every question, I will open the floor to questions from the audience. But there are no long statements. We want questions. And the second rule, only 1 question per person. And please, if you start coming with a second question, I will be nice. So please accept these rules. Otherwise, this interactivity is not going to work. Now let me introduce briefly our panelists, and I start with the panelist to my left. Tom Ojienda, he's a former commissioner of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, and now a member of the Judicial Service Commission. To my immediate left, Hanif Vally, he's the former chief legal advisor for the South African TJRC, and now the Deputy Director of the Foundation for Human Rights in Johannesburg. To my right, I have Bashir Haji Abdullaih, security analyst and retired military officer of the rank of a major. And then to the further right, Christopher Gitari from the International Center for Transitional Justice in Nairobi. Thank you very much for coming. Happy to meet a few people for the first time. And I would like to ask with the first question, which is a more general introductory question. You saw the title of the debate, and as a logical follow-up question, I would like to ask you, if we don't address human rights abuses and other crimes of the past, how secure can we be? And I would like to ask first Mr. Tom Ojienda that question to find out, is it possible? Can we be secure? Can we be safe if we don't address the injustices of the past? Tom.
Thank you, Bettina, for that first question. Clearly, the answer to the first question is a definite no, because national security is not just a function of government or structured, but a function that includes the citizenry within the country. And therefore, if the citizenry has baggage, and that baggage, when I talk about baggage, I talk about has unresolved issues and questions, then they would be open to collaboration with external persons or persons from outside the country, or if you may, aggressors. And that is how the window for crimes, some that may be classified as international crimes. We have seen recently attack on Westgate, and every credible pointers seem to suggest that there may be collaboration between external forces and internal forces in these crimes. When our people are dissatisfied, often they will express themselves in many forms, and that, of course, will lead to insecurity. We also know that what we've had in the past, including the violence in Lamu, has been linked to certain historical questions of land injustice. And clearly, if we do not address historical injustices, there would be discontent that would, of course, then be a danger to national security. And this is without prejudice to the fact that you may have a beautiful constitutional structure that defines the operations of your forces, but if the people have unresolved questions, you cannot be secure as a nation.
Thank you, Bettina. My first reaction is one of the main causes found of gross violations of human rights is impunity. The person commits gross violations of human rights and gets away with it, then they will do it again and again. So it's very important that there be no impunity in any society, because you'll be leading to a society without rules and laws, and you'll be promoting the violations of human rights. Secondly, by definition, what is society there for? Why do we have a system of justice? Why do we have rule of law? And we gain our freedoms through state institutions. One of the main reasons we have state institutions is to ensure the security of the individual, to ensure there's justice, to ensure that if there's a justiciable crime against a person, it will be heard in a court of law, in an impartial institution which has got the confidence of citizens. So if you do not have rule of law, if you do not have the issue of violations of human rights being addressed, you undermine your citizens, you lessen your worth as a citizen, but ultimately you undermine your democracy. Thank you.
Just to add on the aspect of injustices as relates to security, you find that with the new security agenda that is on the rise, the security agents tend to come up with extraordinary measures, sometimes in emergency setup. but with time they sort of become permanent. And these are some of the things now the citizens tend to live with. Unfortunately, the new shape of insecurity is what really dictates the approach of the security agents. In a normal setup, it could be temporary. Unfortunately, it tends to be a bit permanent. And then this becomes sort of an injustice and part of human rights issues. When these kind of situations are faced with security agents, as Tom says, yes, the constitution is very clear, but the execution part of it is where we go wrong, probably. And when we talk of policing, policing is a set of processes, and the police is part of that process. It happened actually in the US when, with the advent of the 9/11, some of the suspects, they couldn't get some proper information, but what do? They said, okay, we need to use some extraordinary measures for those who are in an ordinary circumstance. Unfortunately, those measures sort of become part and parcel of the system. Instead of saying, okay, we are past that level, so we go back to the normal. So some of these injustices, especially touching on human rights, they are not supposed to be there, yes, but it is because of the new shape of threat that we are seeing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think my colleagues have well answered many of the issues. I just will address therefore one, is that when you have a state of violations of human rights, especially over a long period of time, what you tend to see therefore is a breakdown of the nation state, and in particular of relations. So I would address my views from the terms of relations. And if therefore there's a breakdown and the relations can be vertical or horizontal with the state or amongst communities, then you have a state of, in real sense, almost anarchy. People do not feel part of the nation. And we know that in the modern state, the state is guarantor of protection in terms of security and justice. And as a result, if the communities feel that the state has abdicated its duties or even has been a violator, then they no longer trust the state. As a result, what you do have is people feeling that they should take things into their own hands because the civic trust is lost, civic trust with the state, and the trust amongst communities is lost. And essentially you then have people taking up arms and trying to, in a sense, either protect themselves or also avenge for themselves. And therefore, in the real sense, if you do not address those past violations, then you are not safe.
Thank you very much. I would like to open the floor to questions. We do that so that you have the chance also to ask the panelists your own concerns and questions. And I would like to start with the lady over there. Please introduce yourself, your name, and for whom you're working or university background.
Okay, my name is Winnie Chamutai. I'm in third year Strathmore Law School. And my question goes to Dr. Gitari, relating to breakdown in relations. So when you're talking about a breakdown where people feel that they're not adequately represented or taken care of, would you say that secession would be a viable solution to this? Thank you.
Any other question? Or should we first? Yeah, over there, please. Yeah, there.
Thank you. My name is Mokai Orina. I'm a PhD student at the University of Dar es Salaam. My question goes to Hanif and Professor Ojienda also on the choice of mechanism to address injustices, and especially drawing from experiences of the South African TRC, and especially when we look at the Kenyan one, after the report? Is there lack of political goodwill to implement it? And what informs that? Is it was it maybe appropriate that we use a TJRC to address injustices in this country? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tom Wolf. I work at Ipsos. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question was, how can future human rights be secured if past injustices are not dealt with? Would you like to repeat the question? Was that it?
Yeah. If we don't address human rights abuses, how secure can we be?
I think that question, and I'm going to ask, is a bit difficult because I think so much depends on whether the current people controlling the state are directly associated with these past crimes or injustices, or whether it's a new group that's clean. And let me ask the question, I'm not sure anybody can answer it, and that is it actually very naive to expect that any group that's in power associated with these past violations, or even planning some of their own, would in any way confront that issue? Doesn't it really depend upon a major change in the nature of the ruling group before there's any hope whatsoever that whatever past injustices there are would be addressed? And we would be wasting our time to expect otherwise.
Thank you very much. And another one there.
Thank you. My name is Robert Mugai, and my question is directed to Dr. Gitari. So, as regards to the resolution of the past injustices, which is the best method of doing this? Is it locally with already established judicial systems, or would it be referring it to, let's say, the International Criminal Court? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's quite a few aspects. If you want to start.
Thank you for those questions. With the first question really around is secession the solution? Obviously, secession is an international right, and it definitely any group of people, if they feel and deem it fit, they should and can exercise that right. It does not solve the problem. South Sudan is a perfect example where secession was exercised. However, they did really reel back into a catastrophic war. And even just addressing the second question, it's not, there's no, first of all, you cannot be prescriptive in terms of what should be done. I think a good analysis of the context is part. Amongst people. And for that to happen, you really need a number of measures. One, you need to really acknowledge that there has been a violation, and there has been violations, and without that, you're really not moving forward. I think, secondly, beyond the question of recognition, you must move forward to try as much as possible to hold to account persons responsible for those violations. And it may not be that you get that, but you must make all means and do all that you can to do that. And I think the effort is just as important as the end product. You may not get the end product, but you must make the effort, because in making the effort, you're recognizing the harm done, and in the end, actually restoring that civic trust. And sometimes even when it comes to some of the measures that we propose, you realize that in the end we are working towards restoring the rule of law. And by restoring the rule of law, you're basically telling the citizens that, you know what, it is, you are important as a citizen of this country, and you should therefore trust the institutions that are at play in this context, and they will safeguard your rights. So I'm talking about institutional reforms. And therefore, in the end, you find yourself working towards rule of law and democracy, but you must start from where it all begins, in recognizing the harm done and trying to restore the civic trust, which includes a number of measures, be it institutional reforms, be it criminal accountability, or be it trying to address the very needs of the victim and the victim groups and communities that feel marginalized because of history of violations. So there is, in the end, not one answer. I think every context is different, so we cannot be prescriptive. But what has been seen in various countries, Uganda, Guatemala, Chile, and a host of many others, is that all these multiplicity of efforts make sense in terms of working towards justice and security.
Okay. I just want to address the concern of Mr. Tom on the issue of saying, can these injustices be addressed by virtue of the fact that whoever's in charge or the group that is in charge have also been involved in the same historical injustices? I think in the Kenyan context, any group that comes to power at one point or the other has been involved in the same injustices. So I think we can't get a new group from us. These are the same people who will still be coming to power, whether they are the same ones or any group is still going to come. The best is to have institutions reformed to address the issues. A good example is the military. It doesn't matter whoever is in charge of the military. There are set norms in the military that is followed. So I think the best way to address is the institutions that are supposed to address these injustices and historicals to be reformed properly. Because the same groups, people aspiring to be in leadership, have been in position of leadership before. So we will not get new people in Kenya. So the best is to reform the institutions that are supposed to address these injustices.
Okay, before giving the word to you about the TJRC question, perhaps you want to add a thought to this discussion. And then, because now touching the issue of TJRC, I mean, that would have been our second point. So if you want first to address this issue.
Thanks, Bettina. Just one point, since it touches on Tom has raised a very interesting question as to whether it would matter if those in leadership were probably not associated with any of the historical injustices or questions that inform, the daily progress or functioning of the nation. I do not think that it would matter, in my view. I don't think whether, and the South African example is in point, that if for instance, a liberator ascends to the presidency or to the leadership of the country and has a clear agenda for the country, including rooting out historical injustices through a transition mechanism or otherwise, the people will wait upon that leader, whether he was associated with that past or not, to see progress made. Because the nation is only secure when the people in the nation are satisfied that measures are being taken to deal with past injustices. If therefore a leader says that I am clean and that is non-est factum, I did not engage in those acts, and therefore you cannot ask me to remedy those acts, I do not think that would improve the situation. I'm sure Mr. Vally will talk about the TRC report of South Africa. I will talk about the TJRC report that we thought would would resolve some of the issues as being one of the Agenda 4 issues agreed upon on the 28th of February after the violence. But I will say this, that the solution lies on timely recommendations that are put in law that provide answers progressively into the future. If you have a law that, now we have a new constitution, for instance, we have the provision of the constitution having a very beautiful structure, including a structure that defines a security mechanism that creates a National Security Advisory Council at Article 238. But all those structures would not have meaning if the people do not see the results of the beautiful structure that is put into place. So Tom, I would tell you that even if any of the opposition leaders were in power, I think the people in Southern America and the path that those countries were coming from. I'm sure Gitari has alluded to some of them. If you look at Uganda, just close home, that struggled with its past and put in place mechanisms, including traditional mechanisms, to remedy these problems. The problems are with them to date, in spite of the fact that His Excellency Yoweri Museveni was part of the struggle, and can be said not to have been part of the problem of the North.
Thank you. I'll try and combine my answer to address, I think, the questions aimed at me. The first thing is the state has got mechanisms at its disposal. It always has had and always will have, and if necessary, it can pass legislation to create new mechanisms. So, for example, if people have to be charged criminally, or if there's civil action to be brought for damages, those institutions are in fact present. What's needed, an essential ingredient, is the political will, and the political will also includes resources being put in place. So that's the one issue. If you have provisions such as amnesty, that's a political decision which was made at the time of the Truth Commission. It's not necessarily parts of the Truth Commission mechanism, and we can talk about the whole issue of amnesty separately. But one of the issues that came up in our TRC was there was a macro challenge by victims about the whole legality and legitimacy of our provisions for amnesty. And some very prominent families, the Biko family, as you know, everyone knows how Steve Biko was tortured and killed. Ribeiro family, husband and wife, doctors involved, medical doctors involved in the struggle, both were assassinated by state agents. Playing family, human rights lawyers, both viciously murdered by the state. And they went to court. They went to the Constitutional Court and they said, how dare you take away our right to justice? How dare you take away our right to claim civil damages? The Constitution says, in terms of our Bill of Rights, that all justiciable offenses should be tried in court. And one of the findings of the Constitutional Court was that the state which is there at present is not the state responsible for the atrocities. We've got a bigger picture to cover. We have to ensure that the whole society is uplifted because people's socioeconomic rights have been undermined over generations. Now, there is going to be that playoff. The reality is that once the state has got primary responsibility for ensuring the protection of human rights, historically the state has been the biggest violator of human rights internationally. That's the first issue. The second issue is there's a doctrine of succession, that whether there's a different political party in power, whether there's a different system of political representativity is irrelevant. The bottom line is you are still representing the state and you're still responsible for whatever the state was responsible for in the past. But the third issue is this, that if you don't address these issues, if you don't address these violations, we've talked about undermining democracy, but more important, that the problems in your society will still fester. South Africa is a classical case. We, in the Truth Commission, were asked to look at gross violations of human rights, and this was narrowly defined into killings, abductions, torture, severe ill treatment. But in effect, we were looking and examining colonialism and post-colonialism, which is called apartheid in our society. But that wasn't part of the mandate. And as a result, we still have got this gross inequality in our society. We've got massive unemployment. We've got 87% of the land, the indigenous people were dispossessed of in 1930 and 1936. And only 6% of the land has been restored. So that inequality in society, that instability within society will remain until it is addressed. So whether you're responsible for the past or not, you are suffering the effects of the past, and the injustices of the past have to be addressed. Otherwise, you are just rewarding the perpetrators of the injustices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we are already fully in the second point, talking about accountability issues and the truth commissions. And I would like to start with Hanif. Did South Africa deal with its past through the Truth Commission? What did you do once you had the report and the recommendations? Were they followed? What kind of lessons learned did you take away from that process? I would like to ask the question only to Hanif and then hand over to Tom.
Like most questions, is a yes and no. I think every society should, at various intervals, look at its own psyche. And in the sense, we were partly successful in that. The society had to look within itself. It wasn't just people who talked about what the state had done to them. It was also the institutions of the state. We had the legal profession, we had the medical profession, we had the business profession, we had the educators, the health profession, etc., etc. What did we as a profession, what did we as a society, how did we handle this situation we were faced, and what can we do in future to make sure that it doesn't happen again? So it's very important for us to examine our own psyche, our own society, and how can we work and improve on that. And so in that sense, it was very positive. Also, we must always remember that there should be a primacy of the rights of victims. And that has been broken down into the following issues. The right to know what happened, who did what, where's my child buried, etc. The right to tell. The right to tell your story is very important. You need to affirm people's reality because there's a denial, there's a whole state propaganda machine, there's a whole government communications machinery which is going against what your reality was, what you experienced. And so that right to tell, again, identifies your standing, emphasizes your standing in society. The right to justice. People talk about restorative justice as opposed to punitive justice, and that's another discussion we should have. And the right to reparations, that's also crucial. So those are the primacy, the primacy of victims are encompassed in those principles. However, when these principles were talked about, that was the civil and political rights. The original principles were discussed by someone called Monsieur Johannet, but parallel to Mr. Johannet's report was a report by Haji Cisse, who talked about socio-economic rights. And in the socio-economic rights he talked about went into colonialism, apartheid, slavery, etc. For various reasons, even internationally, that report hasn't been taken forward. Only the political and civil rights violations has been taken forward. But even focusing on that, in our Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the victims who were officially recognized, there was a whole procedure whereby victims were recognized and accorded victim status, in itself a controversial issue. But they were only given 1/5 of what the recommendations were they should be given in reparations. What the victims have done is that they've organized themselves into an organization called Kulumani. In fact, they go so far as to say that they're not an NGO, but they're a social movement. And it's become an extremely powerful social movement in a sense that the pressure has continued, and to the extent where they've even been part of litigation in America against big American companies who benefited from apartheid. So it's quite an important social movement talking about justice and talking about social justice issues, and also ensuring that there isn't backdoor, what we call backdoor amnesties, where people, the state has through administrative processes tried to give people amnesty. So there have been those positive issues. One of the things we talk about is that in order for a society to move forward, you have to have a common narrative. You have to have a common story and understanding of what happened in the past. For the very reasons that states have this powerful machinery to actually have their version put forward. The narrative, a very crude narrative in a South African state was, whatever these injustices are not true, it's just communist propaganda, nothing to do with democracy and human rights and ending colonialism. So that was the narrative of the state. Then the attitude is, all right, so we've had our hearings, so let's move on. Not talking about the impact and the effect of those injustices on present society. So whilst our initial attitude was common narrative, and from there we can build upon it, we've realized now that that narrative has to be continually fought for. And the fact of having gone through a truth and reconciliation process means that there is a narrative which is in a sense the history of the society recorded in a way that cannot be challenged. Of course it will be undermined, and of course it will be said that let's turn the page. But the fact is that there is now a common narrative, and from there you have to defend it and move forward to address the issues raised by the common narrative. Thank you.
The recommendations and the problem of...
well, the recommendations, one of the issues has been the issue of reparations, and it's a major issue. And so there is still constant pressure, and in fact, there is a whole plan of action devised by Kulumani, amongst others, saying this is what reparations should look like, this is how it should be implemented, and the pressure is still going on, it's ongoing on government. And that interaction between government and civil society has not gone away. Prosecutions, the government has been particularly lax in prosecutions. We had a provision that said that if you did not apply for amnesty, or if you applied for amnesty and were refused for amnesty, you could be prosecuted. Actual prosecutions have been very few. There have been one or two middle-level, lower-level people who've been prosecuted, but no one further than that. In fact, on the contrary, the government has tried to introduce administrative provisions where they try to give people amnesty through the back door, which has had to be challenged in court by counsel like Mr. Vally sitting in front here, successfully blocking the government from giving amnesty. So there has been a distinct lack of political will in that respect.
Thank you. Where are we? We all know the report has been published. I'm sorry.
Forgot. I would like to ask Tom the same question. Where are we in Kenya? The report has been published. Is it realistic to hope that the report will be implemented? Should we look for other solutions, how to use all the content and the historic information in the report? Should we fight for it? What should be done in the Kenyan case?
Thank you, Bettina. The question that Mr. Orina asked was whether whether it was necessary in the first place to have had a Truth Justice and Reconciliation Commission in Kenya, and what the state of the report, as you have suggested, is at this point. I think it's common knowledge that the background to the establishment of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission through an Act of Parliament, Act number 6 of 2008, was as a result of the post-election violence that we witnessed after the elections of December 20, 2007 and the subsequent swearing in of the then former president, Mwai Kibaki. Violence erupted, leading to loss of lives. I think over 1,500 people died. Many persons were displaced. And with the intervention of the African Union and the His Excellency Kofi Annan, the agenda agreed, the 4 agenda agreed, including the first agenda that led to the cessation of violence, led to the need to find long-term solutions to the problems that Kenya has had. And that is how Agenda 4 settled on the establishment of a Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. And remember, the intention of the creation of the TJRC was to act as a transitional measure to end the various forms of violence that we have had in this country, including the sporadic violence that we've had in the past election years, 2002, and before then, largely focused, of course, in the Rift Valley and other regions. And of course, we had other commissions, the Cumin Commission, making recommendations along the lines that Orina has proposed, that, you know, prosecution and other measures. The Truth Commission was built on a framework that intended to deliver long-term solutions to this country. And that is because it recognized youth unemployment, it recognized the land question, it recognized the imbalances amongst the people of this country, it recognized various ethnic tensions that have continued to exist in this country amongst various communities. And hence, it was not just simply intended to solve short-term problems, but to offer short-term solutions. And that is why when we presented the over 2,000-page report in 6 volumes to His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta on the 22nd of August 2013 at State House, the intention was that the government would kick in motion the implementation of the report of the TJRC. The TJRC report, in terms of the provisions of the TJR Act number 6 of 2008, was supposed to be implemented within a time frame set out in the Act, and that time frame included intervention by Parliament. Parliament was supposed to adopt the report, not debate the report, and thereafter pass on the report to the minister then responsible for justice for implementation, with the requirement that the minister reports to Parliament every 6 months on the implementation of the report of the TJRC. Unfortunately, what happened is that after we gave in the report, the Act was amended to allow Parliament to debate the report. I am meant to understand that the report has been in the order paper for quite a bit. It has not been debated by Parliament. But of course, the danger that lies in Parliament debating the report is that it may then alter the report, because when it is part of debate, then it also has power to alter, to make changes. And I think we also run into a problem with the law, because a number of individuals serving in Parliament recommended in the annexes of the report for various measures or actions. I think there are some people serving in the Senate who are recommended for investigation, and some serving in the current Parliament who are recommended for investigation, who are accused of having violated various rights. And so you see, we are at a point where we're asking certain individuals who are mentioned in the report to implement the report. And that is why we are where we are. Let me say this, that the report, the provisions of the TJR Act, Section 5, involved the investigation of various human rights violations. And the recommendations touch on the various functions of the Commission. The first function was to properly document the history of this country, and that I think has been achieved even without implementation, without the formal implementation of the report, because the complete, accurate, and historical record of human rights violation and historical injustice is in the report, and the report is in the public domain. Number two, which is not achieved, is that the report was meant to offer restorative justice through recommendations of prosecution, amnesty, and reparations. We have various recommendations for prosecution of various individuals who are responsible for various human rights violations. That can only be achieved if the mechanism of implementation is activated by Parliament. Secondly, amnesty, recommended for a number of actors, also cannot be achieved without Parliament kicking in the implementation mechanism. The same applies to reparations for victims of human rights abuses. We had made recommendations for various modes of reparation, including payment payoffs to a number of individual victims. We had recommended various forms of memorabilia, various forms of distributive justice to victims of violence in Northeastern, the construction of facilities like hospitals, monuments in Wagala, and other places. That cannot be done without the implementation mechanism being kicked into action. Yes, so largely I would say that healing and reconciliation and national security can only be best served if the report of the Commission is implemented. And I think that also goes for restoration of the dignity of victims of various human rights violations. True, Ms. Orina, as you've suggested, there are a number of things that can be done without necessarily implementing the report. For instance, certain investigations can be commenced, but there's need for goodwill, political goodwill, on the part of the various actors, including the Office of the DPP. They can look at the report, they can commence investigations into various acts of violations. There are several private prosecutions that can be commenced by civil society and other actors in implementing the report. And I believe that the clamor for implementation is important, so that as we have seen, various voices have called for the implementation of the report of the Truth Commission. And I believe that will resolve a lot of issues of national security that inform the topic for discussion today. Thank you.
Before opening the floor to questions, I would like to ask Chris to add his thoughts.
Yeah, I think I move from a different paradigm. And, you know, just answering also Tom's question on possibilities, and how do you therefore have action, really, the Truth Commission report. I don't believe in a situation where everything will happen at the same time. And really nowhere has it ever happened. People always say Chile, but Chile, 20 years, it took time. And I think the same thing for Kenya. I think firstly is to recognize that even within the TJRC report, it is not that it is this one pot where everything is happening. You had different reform initiatives already ongoing. So for example, police reforms, which is recommended in the TJRC report, has been ongoing. You had the Rangley Task Force team looking at police reforms. You have the constitution, which really redefined and re-engineered the police institution in terms of establishment of our police service commission. And then you have the way in which they should work, the role of the Inspector General being very clearly articulated. And then you also have the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. So you find that the TJRC report may propose some recommendations, but remember that there are some reform initiatives that have been going parallel to the TJRC process, and we must therefore keep those in mind and that not despair in real sense. I think there have been reform initiatives ongoing, and we need to keep a watch on those and keep pushing. Police vetting is a clear example where within this very narrow space of a politics that doesn't really favor serious human rights, addressing serious human rights violations, you have this narrow space of police vetting, which is happening in commanding officers or officers who are of non-gazetted officers in sense. And so that is a possibility and can happen. I think that is a clear example of, even within vetted spaces, there is room for the reform agenda. I also would, for example, say that you have, for example, land reforms, the National Land Commission, and maybe checking about how far that is going. It's not. So you do have instances which you can point out and say the reform agenda can go on. The prevention of torture bill, that is a clear legislation that, so there are things that can be done that we can do even as we push this broad agenda. And maybe lastly, I would say that I think it's even more important to look at the needs of those persons, really understand what are those, and I don't think reparations fine. I think in these you find some of the little structures. You can't address some of these issues. Maybe at national reparations level, where we are demanding for, difficult, still room to advocate and push. But we must find ourselves asking the question, what are the needs of these communities and what can we do even with these narrow spaces? And what you find is that the state is interested in reparations in that discussion, and maybe we need to engage more vigorously, because victimity may not happen. But you know what we always say about transitional justice, just like politics, it's the art of the possible. And what may not be possible now will be possible soon. So we must prepare ourselves and keep pushing. And I think that's, for me, where I come from.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to open the floor to any questions. Okay. Simon. 1, 2.
Okay, my name is Joseph from Mombasa. My question is to Tom Ojienda. It's about the TJRC report. Even before it was taken to Parliament, where you say politicians might alter it because of reasons you explained, don't you think the report already lost a big chunk of its credibility with the reports that it may have been altered even before it was handed over to the president to exclude names of senior politicians who the report had mentioned adversely?
Thank you. Good morning. Bobby Mkangi, work as a legal consultant based here in Nairobi. I just want to push further on the issue of amnesty. And especially as how it relates to what Hanif called the common narrative. And I believe the South African case probably was a success because the foundation of the process was based on the fact that amnesty was central to it. With that in mind, and from what Tom has told us, that amnesty is one of the ways that restorative justice can be central, and especially state past and present will be key people in these processes. If that was the foundation of our entire process, and if that can be made the way forward, do you think we're going to attain better success? And we cannot get a common narrative, and therefore accountability because some people is right. Would like to hear, and also maybe from Chris, if amnesty was central in our thinking through better success.
Last one, Howard here. Then, let's first do the background because we have to go back aspect. But first, Howard.
Thanks, Howard Vally, International Center for Transitional Justice, Johannesburg. Thanks for the insights from the different speakers. There's certain commonalities between South Africa and Kenya, and I think what Hanif and really is a set of weight. I'd like to hear from speakers actually. Why is it that mechanisms in Kenya that are linked to the rule of law are the very same mechanisms responsible for breaking the rule of law? A recent history, the big massacres that took place in political assassinations that have taken place and resolved, the post-election violence, and blanket impunity, those killings. How is it that in the space of a few weeks, and yet so little justice emerges? I've heard things, well, there's simply no evidence. And the question is, well, why haven't investigations unearthed some evidence? It's simply undie, and the stock response is, well, we have these cases further. In South Africa, the country where I come from, yes, we've had a truth commission, we've had a transition, and yet we're repeating the same mistakes that we made under apartheid. How is it in South Africa that notwithstanding the changes, we can have a massacre of protesting miners and 34 are gunned down by police at the end of 2012? You have to ask, well, how much has really changed? And he spoke about the fact that very few individuals, when they were denied amnesty or failed to apply for amnesty, and these are individuals, many of them members of an abusive state who committed killings and other gross human rights violations. And I would suggest that the failure to go after those people invites further impunity and results in massacres such as the massacre at Marikana. Here in Kenya, there's a cycle of violence, a cycle of conflict, and the mechanisms that are meant to intervene are not intervening. And I'd like to hear from the speakers, why are they not intervening? Why are they not standing up to political pressure? Why is an institution like the Truth and Justice and Reconciliation Commission, which had every opportunity to stand up and be independent, failed to do so? And I share the concerns by the speaker who said, well, the report lacks credibility because at the last minute it was changed. Now, if the commissioners allow the report to be changed at the last minute and succumb to political pressure, then it certainly lacks credibility. Why should the government take that report seriously? They won't even print the report. The few reports that have been printed were printed by an aid agency, in fact a German aid agency. The government won't even print the report. They won't take it seriously. Thank you.
I would first like now to ask the speakers to answer these three questions. Where do we start? Commenting on the questions? Perhaps start with you, Tom. And please, let's be brief now because time is running and we have the next issue on the...
Thank you, Bettina. I have to answer a question I've answered so many times. And I'm glad that he's asked the question. I have had to answer it before and after we gave the report to His Excellency the President. And I think it's well captured in the, if you Google TJRC report change, you will find the dissent by 3 commissioners relevant to the land chapter. First and foremost, let me explain that the Truth Commission's report was in 6 volumes. And the one volume that I think has been captured at the TJRC report, and I think this is a common misunderstanding that seems to have permeated even amongst the academia, is the land chapter. By some stroke of coincidence, I chaired the task force that worked on the land chapter, because that's my background. I'm a land person. The subject of the so-called alterations, quote unquote, is with respect to paragraphs 203, 227, 231, and 257. 4 paragraphs in that chapter. And they relate to terminology in what the dissenting commissioners referred to as a change of terminology before the final report was published. I'm sure a number of you read the dissenting views as published in the Star after the report of the commission had been given to His Excellency the President. And if you read between the lines, you will have noted that the concern was about reference to, one, the initial so-called draft, agreed draft, had named communities by name. It had said that the Kikuyu had grabbed land at the coast. The final draft that was said to have been changed referred to Kenyan communities. That is apparent. Number 2, the initial so-called authentic draft at paragraph 257 had mentioned the first president of the Republic of Kenya, President Kenyatta, as having alienated 250 acres of land, 250 plots, and allocated them. The final draft did not refer to the specific plots. The initial draft also had referred and named certain communities and alluded to the fact that they had grabbed land at the coast, but that's paragraph 261, but the final draft left out the specific reference. And there are reasons for this. And I think this is where I think the public has, those who talk about alterations probably have not understood. One, the draft before the final publication of the TJRC report, the land chapter, was work in progress. And at various stages, the Commission met and discussed the drafts. The technocrats or technical people verified the information at every stage. I was the leader of the land chapter. And the factual issues in the report needed to tell or to speak to the truth. So every information that we read that informed our final report had to have a source. The source of all the literature that informed paragraph 257, 203, 261, and 231 was a publication by Charles Hornby, A History of Kenya Since Independence, page 314, and so on and so forth. Then the other source was from a letter from Basil Criticus, dated 25th November 2011. There was a problem with these sources. We were using secondary material. We were also using information from an individual, Basil Criticus, who himself was a perpetrator and who had not turned up to testify. So when we were doing the final verifications, certain information had not been verified by our investigators. For instance, the specificity of the number of plots that had been quote-unquote grabbed. The only source being Hornby Charles publication. And let me tell you this, that the final agreed version of the report, because we had various drafts, about 6 drafts before the final draft. The final draft was never changed by anyone. The so-called change of the report stemmed from the fact that 3 commissioners, international commissioners, were not happy with the final wording of 4 paragraphs because they preferred the earlier versions of the paragraphs as previously worded. And that is what then led to the conflict and the failure by the 3 commissioners to sign the land chapter. There was no alteration. The recommendations were not part. These were not part of the recommendations. This was part of the narrative. And it was about agreeing on a wording that would be acceptable and that did not depart from the objective, one of the objectives for which you were created, that is national cohesion and integration. And I think everyone needs to understand this, that the land chapter is the best of all the chapters written from the Truth Commission's report. You just need to look for it or find it. I'll also say finally that unfortunately, because of the dissent, this dissent, I think, was overplayed because some of the commissioners did not turn up when we handed over the report to His Excellency the President, because they felt that having dissented, they needed not appear in State House when we were handing over the report. But if we had intended to change the report, why do we have a list of names of individuals, including all those in power, including certain people who worked with us in the commission, in the same report? And I think probably those who talk about the report having been altered have found the non-implementation of the report. And I think even those who overplayed the meaning of these 2 paragraphs have turned out to be on the side of those who do not want to implement the report. Because the report is not about 2 paragraphs. The report is not about mentioning Kikuyu by name. The report is about the recommendations: amnesty, reparations, restorative justice for victims of violence or human rights violations in this country. It's a good report, and I would encourage all of you to read the land chapter before falling into the general thought that there were any alterations. There are none. We just did not agree. And let me tell you about the Truth Commission. Yes. Those commissioners who started off as friends ended up as enemies, not even saying bye to each other as they left the country. It was a shifty commission where you had allies and enemies every single time as we moved on from one stage of the commission to the next. Thank you.
Sorry.
1 minute, please, Hanif.
Just addressing the amnesty issue. Amnesty in any TRC process, by and large, depends on the power relations in that society. So, Second World War, the Allies won. You had Nuremberg trial, you had Tokyo trials. Chile, you had a situation where the military at that point was still in power. Pinochet, he gave all the armed forces, or attempted to give all the armed forces, a general amnesty. South Africa, there was a bit of a deadlock between the two groupings. One side could conquer but could not control. The other side could not conquer but they didn't allow control. There were conditional amnesty provisions, and in fact, this was the issue which held up the whole negotiation process for some time. So in South Africa, we had a situation where it was conditional amnesty based on individual application, proportionality of the offense committed, a link to the past, and full disclosure of all the facts before you got amnesty. What should also be noted in South African situation is it is a quasi-judicial process in terms of if there's amnesty applied for a gross violation of human rights, it had to be chaired by a judge. Now, in spite of this, there was a situation, and sorry, the Commission could not review the amnesty decisions. In spite of this, there was a situation where amnesty was granted to a whole group of ANC officials, which was then overturned because the Commission went to court to say that this was incorrectly granted. So it wasn't holus bolus amnesty. Even there were challenges regarding the amnesty provisions. Did amnesty work for us or didn't it work for us? Look, even when amnesty was applied for, the victims had the right to be represented. And the victims had a right to legal representation in the sense that the Commission funded their legal representation. So they could challenge the applications for amnesty. Of course, there were limited grounds. So it wasn't a general amnesty. Did it work? Didn't it work? It worked in the sense that those who were already in jail were willing to make disclosure, but they wanted to get out of jail. Those who were charged already, were imminently facing prosecution, were more willing to come out. But those who in fact had committed atrocities, etc., who felt they were not going to be charged or were not in any danger, sat tight. So I don't think it's a general rule that it works. Last point is that it's a suspension of the rule of law. It doesn't reinforce the rule of law. People are entitled to justice. People are entitled to have trials. People are entitled to civil damages. So it's a suspension of justice in the context of peace versus justice. But we'll talk about that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will address your point, Howard, when we end the workshop, because in fact it was part of my last question. So I would like now to ask, to my right, coming back to the security concerns and how does it work together with our search for justice. First question would be, what are the real security and stability threats that Kenya faces today? And I'm also meaning to talk about the narrative which was developed here in Kenya. You have to be probably quite careful what kind of narrative you're using. You want, on the one hand side, you have security concerns. You have to be careful that it doesn't come together with politicking. Some people say that's what happened when you were analyzing what happened in Peketoni. So I would like to ask the question, what are the real security and stability threats Kenya is facing?
Thank you. The security threats that probably Kenya state and the society faces are in two folds. Currently we have emerging threats and we used to have traditional threats. Previously, we used to categorize this into internal threats, external threats. Unfortunately, some of the external threats are also becoming internal threats. The external threats we're talking about is violence emanating from across borders. Remember, Kenya is bordering Somalia, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Uganda, Tanzania. So any violence emanating from that side, by whichever group, traditionally will be categorized as external threat. We also have the normal internal threats, traditional internal threats, whereby it is normal criminal elements, violence within the country. Those are also threats. However, you also need to look this from the point of saying there are certain threats which are a threat to the state and other threats which are directly to society. The other threat that we also have, of course, we experienced was political violence. It happened in 2008. And it was due to politics. Currently, we're also having some issues of politics, of course. Issue of referendum, we're looking at it, does it affect security? Some will say yes, some will say no. So if you look at it also, yes, we could also be having issues of politics becoming a threat to national security when you look at it as political violence. Now, when you look at the aspect of external threat, and when I say external threat now becoming internal threat, the emerging trend right now is from Al-Shabaab. It is from across Somalia, which we neighbor. But now that same external threat is equally becoming an internal threat, because they seem to be present here. So how do you deal with an external threat that has become internal? That is also a pointer to some of the policies or measures that to be taken. So generally, those are the threats. And the threats can be directly to the state, or to the site, or to both. In one of my, when I was going around some places, some members of the public also said, our threat is also from the state. So it also depends how they look at it. So yes, basically that is what it is. On the issue of how does politics, and this was in light of what happened in Peketoni. Certainly security, what we say is keep politics out, and we handle security, or the state agencies handle security properly. Unfortunately, when security is politicized, it is the ordinary public or the citizen that will suffer, because the state will protect itself. So the best way to address is whatever happens is kept as a security issue, and politics is out. In Peketoni, of course, I know it is in the public domain what happened. The highest level said politics was behind. Another group, an external group, claimed responsibility. All that also points to a disjointed working group, where one element in security says this happened, another one says this happened. So I think that everybody is aware of it. But basically, the greatest threat right now facing Kenya is that external threat, which has now mutated to be also internal. And the issue comes in, how do we deal with that kind of threat? Traditionally, the military is supposed to protect our borders or protect us from external threat. But that threat is now within. How do we involve the military to deal with this? And for information, that kind of deployment or the military being told now, deal with this has repercussions. It might not be very good But this is the emerging threat. KDF went to Somalia. The first time, the movement was very nice, very good, well organized. Then we reacted or changed to AMISOM. And I'm sure, from an operational perspective, since KDF changed to AMISOM, much progress has not been made. It was better that we continued with the initial operation in Linda itself. But of course, logistic issues and so many things had to come in, and that's why they had to join AMISOM. So what were the reasons we went out there? Yes, it's documented. But now we have the same group that is causing chaos and doing the attacks inside Kenya. And I think a number of measures have been taken through the organization of the security agents. A new command in the military coming up, restructuring of the internal security mechanisms, involving of the military in internal matters. It might not be very good, yes, but we are dealing with a situation whereby that external enemy is here with you. So who has capacity to deal with this? Capacity of the internal security apparatus is not that very good. So it has to be complemented.
But has the government been responding to these threats?
Yes, the response has been there. It might not be 100%. When the government says we need to deploy the military in internal affairs, we need to appreciate the fact that it's because that internal threat has emanated from an external threat. It is there. Yesterday we looked at the new changes in the immigration. If you look at immigration now, it has issues of border controls. So when you have new faces in that kind of department, then you just say, yes, something has been done in the security sector. Measures are there, yes. They might not be 100% as I said, but something has been done. But the thing that is a bit disjointed is the issue of the internal security apparatus. Where is the intelligence and the police? I think when we look at what has been happening in the past weeks, and it has come in the public domain, that the heads of one unit and the other unit might not be working cordially. Ultimately, it is security that is affected. So I think that government has realized, and I'm sure you have seen the changes. But nevertheless, there's so much work that needs to be done in terms of internal security. Once you ask the military to fully engage in internal matters, it is not that very good. Even the sight of seeing military inside towns or something like that, it scares away everybody. But we look at the fact that these are extraordinary times that calls for such measures, albeit with some measures to be done with a lot of decorum. So yes, some measures have been done, but not to the expectations.
Thank you very much. And I would like to open the floor to questions. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Let's first do the 3, yeah? 1.
Thank you. My name is Uwe Wissenbach. I work for the European Union here in Nairobi. Question on this is, apart from the discussions on politics, when you look at this from an outside perspective like mine, you see that there is blatant incompetence of the security forces. There is a high level of corruption, which is regularly denied, but I mean, when the UN that the KDF in Somalia is not doing what they're paid to do by the EU, by the way, which means fighting Al-Shabaab, but they're organizing smuggling, criminal networks together with Al-Shabaab. This evidence is simply denied, dismissed, as if it wasn't there. So there doesn't seem to be any consequences on doing something about it because everything's denied. We had the same incident in Westgate, where looting was documented when you talk to the shop owners and so on and so forth, and there was a simple denial that these things have ever happened. So the impression is that, and you said yourself also, that there is no cooperation, again, a blatant incompetence of the security forces to actually cooperate together to actually deal with the security threats. And finally, it seems to me that a lot of Kenyans are afraid of the security forces, like the police. So they want to avoid getting in touch with them. So they don't see the security forces as actually helping them or providing security. And you hear a lot of incidents that security forces themselves are actually in cahoots with criminals and organizing things. So apart from politicizing some of the issues, I mean, what is your answer to these kind of questions? What can we do to ensure that there's more competence and more capacity in the security forces to actually do their job? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Rafael Ngetich. I'm a student at Strathmore Law School. I have a question in response to what Mr. Abdullahi Bashir has raised. Because if we are to leave the security if we are to leave politics out of the security matters, I think then a question arises, which is really what brings us here today, because it's in the discretion that we leave to the government that we have these injustices. So what exactly are your recommendations? Because it's the rights violations arise exactly if we are to say that security is just a province of the government alone. We shouldn't go into it, because this is really the misuse of power, independence, and it's what has really caused the historical injustices we are talking about. Thank you.
Yeah. My name is Joseph Murad from Capital FM, and my question goes to Abdullahi Bashir on the issue of external threats, becoming turning to become internal. What can we attribute to this new trend, and is it normal for external issues becoming internal threats, and what is the real cause? Can you attribute it to corruption, or is it just normal?
Thank you. My name is Walter Menya. Now, when I'm looking at security and justice, perhaps to Mr. Bashir, I would just want to widen it a bit and also talk about the issue of witness protection agency, because it's like we have deliberately weakened the agency structurally and economically, financially, to the extent that right now, if I have information regarding any security threat, then I'll think twice before taking it to the police or any security organ. Perhaps you could address that too.
Okay, Bashir, I would like to give you.
Yeah. Let me start with the issue of external threat becoming internal threats and what could be the causes. There are a number of issues at hand or at play. When we talk of external threats becoming or mutating into internal threats, what we mean basically is that the external group has imported or is using rather internal elements within the country to carry out these attacks. It's either the same group that has sneaked into the country causing the same, or using people already living in the country to carry out the same. So if you look at the group coming in to carry out the attack, the issue of corruption at the borders. I think our borders, the manning and the surveillance and control of the borders is very weak. And the aspect of corruption comes in, that you can walk in as long as nobody talks to you at the border, probably people pay something. So there's corruption at the borders that allows people to sneak in. So some of the elements could be causing this kind of damages. The other aspect within the country is because we have youths who are probably unemployed, and the issue of poverty comes in. So these youths who are radicalized are the ones who are being used by the external threat to cause this kind of attacks. So yes, corruption plays a very key role in terms of adding to the insecurity layers in the country. The borders are very porous. The surveillance are not very adequate. And for the few people who are posted there, then the aspect of corruption comes in. So I think it requires concerted efforts to really stem the issue of corruption. And it's all about mindset. You can change the people, but how about the institution? So yes, so those two, corruptions, poverty of youths in the country causes the same. The issue of giving information to the police and somebody says he's afraid to give it and probably you will be suspicious, it is there. Our main problem is we did not invest in information. When you give information to the police, some will say, where do you get the information from? So they brand you as a suspect in the first place. So there's that kind of, you fear to take the information to the right office. And it is there. In the modern world, people who work in the underworld and getting information, they really invest. And actually they have people who they pay a retainer. Whether you bring information or not, you are on a retainer package. And you know where to take the information. With the police system here, or the intelligence system, is that investment is not there. The individual officer who's assigned the work to do, even if he's assigned that amount of money or investment, it doesn't trickle down to the people who are supposed to give information. So the informal system within the intelligence and the police in this country is not there, because they are not investing in it. But in other places, you will say an informer, you bring information or no information, you are on a trainer package. So that means he is motivated to provide information relating to insecurity to the concern. And that's why you come and see, why do Americans have prior information than the police? I'm sure that question has been there all around. It's because they're investing in this gathering information. And these are things probably some of us shared in different forums, that this has to change. That if you want to be in the lead in getting information and ABCD, then invest in that kind of things. People who bring information, treat them with respect and not to be taken as suspects. So I think that is the aspect. On the other aspect of issue of politics, yes, we have political leaders. The only problem we are trying to separate security and politics is that now we have an Inspector General of Police. It's an independent institution. But sometimes the ministry wants to run the show of the police, which is an independent institution. And that's why now issues of politicization of the aspect comes in. But if we really say the Inspector General or the National Police Service is fully independent, let them do their job, then security will be dealt with accordingly. Unfortunately, we are unable to divorce politics and security. So the advice will be, this institution is independent, in writing at least, but please let it do its job as per the Constitution. So we have a number of issues, internal security aspects, but I think certain reforms have been undertaken, and probably there could be some improvements. The other aspect is security is everybody's responsibility. There is the police and also there is the policing. Individuals or groups or the public can take part in policing. So it's not a matter of saying we leave it to the state agencies only. Weaknesses are there, yes, but also there are also weaknesses on the public as well. So I think I might not be exhaustive, but probably that can answer.
Yeah, allow me just to touch on one particular issue, which he's touched on, is the subversion of institutions by the political elite and the National Assembly. And this subversion is what leads to abdication of duties by institutions that are supposed to take up those duties. For example, the DPP or the Inspector General of Police, or institutions, independent institutions, clothed with this independence by the Constitution. And so that subversion coming from whether the political elite and those are people who are associated with the office of the President or the National Assembly and Parliament generally. And they would do it in a number of ways. It could either be the question around funding and financing, and it's a reward and punishment mechanism. Institutions that are seen to be loyal to the political elite are rewarded with the funds and the financing that befits them, and those who are playing an independent mind or have displaying independence are punished with lack of funding. And we've seen this with the National Commission of Human Rights, especially when they published the report on the brink of the precipice. We do see a complete slashing of funds. And this is one way you see subverting the will of independent institutions. And this is a play between, of course, the National Assembly playing a hand, and of course, Office of the President and the Treasury. And this is important in terms of them saying, where are we as a country and where are we going? So you have that basic and first challenge. So you have a political elite not understanding that independence of institutions is what will bring stability to the nation, and having them capitulate to their whims does not. The second has been the persons who are recruited to serve in these institutions. Persons who don't understand or haven't inculcated Article 10 of the Constitution in terms of the values and principles of being, and this is also Chapter 6, a state officer or a public officer. And what you see is persons who are willingly capitulate to the demands of the political elite, willingly, and submit themselves, and have these careerist approaches towards governance and towards the roles that they play in their institutions. And therefore the terms, my hands are tied, comes very often. And even therefore the demand, for example, on the DPP or the Inspector General of Police to investigate and prosecute such massive crimes like post-election violence crimes fall on deaf ears. And we have to be frank and say things as they are. There is evidence on post-election violence crimes, plenty of evidence. 1,100 persons did not just commit suicide. So there were schemes and there were mechanisms that went into play to cause such violations in only 59 days. So you have that second challenge. And the third one has to be what we call the organizing question. What is the organizing question for this country to move forward? And the organizing question is in the TJRC report and agenda item number 4. That's the framework. But you have a political leader that has rejected our organizing question. But cannot replace it with any other because they are not so clever enough to produce another. So you have no organizing question. And therefore we will stumble from crisis to crisis until we put our heads back on and get some direction.
Okay, let me end with trying to find some solutions to all the problems you mentioned. And I would like to start with Hanif. But the question, how do we break this cycle of impunity? For you, perhaps it would be more a question like, how do we come up with accountability mechanisms in the security sector? I mean, the big two issues I think we have been discussing all along is impunity and is how to come up with mechanisms of how to reach accountability, how to hold the people accountable, the different sectors. And I would like to ask the question first to Hanif and then go and close the session.
Thank you, Bettina.
any society looks at the application of a constitution in its society through the prism of its own history, and Kenya has to learn from its history. Constitution was a long time in the making, etc. Now, how is this constitution to be interpreted, and how do you make sure that the principles in the constitution, which people have fought for and died for, are to be respected? This is what we even now doing back home, which is that the old nationalism that we use to fight colonialism, we're trying to change into a constitutional patriotism. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is this interaction between society, between citizens and government is an ongoing issue. It is not something that has to be revived from time to time. The society moves forward through rational discussion, and that role that the citizens have to play, that the civil society has to play, the pressure that civil society has to bring on government is not only something that has to come out every 4 years during elections. And sometimes it leads to tension, but government must also learn that this is a healthy tension and necessary for any society to move forward. And then thirdly, hard actions. When I say hard actions, I mean court cases. Has anyone attempted to bring a private prosecution? Is there a possibility of that happening? If so, why not? As a test case, and see what happens. Thank you, Bettina.
I think it's not that very easy to hold security agents accountable, especially when we have a number of cases of insecurity. As I said before, some of the measures that the security agents put in place, initially they are supposed to be temporary, but they tend to become part of the system. So I think in terms of accountability, we see a few changes, so part of the police reforms. We have the Independent Police Officer Authority, which is also trying to fit into a system and say, yes, we will hold the police accountable. I think they also need to strengthen their efforts and widen their scope. Currently, they are based here only in Nairobi, so it's important they also have representatives in all the counties for them to be very, very effective. They're just trying, and it happened the other day when they said they will nullify the police recruitment. That itself is part of accountability, that we're holding you accountable because you didn't do your actions ABCD. And the same happens. If there are violations or individuals feeling that they are violated by the security agents, the same, the IPOA, you can take your complaints to IPOA. They might not immediately do it, yes, but it's a step in the right direction. And the best is to help in providing security individually, collectively as well. Because if there are no insecurities, and it happens, whenever there's an operation to be conducted, some of the security agents feel happy about it because the issues of corruption, the issues of harassment comes in. So the best is how do we maintain a safe and secure environment? The state has the ultimate responsibility, but individually you also equally play a role. So I think in terms of accountability, we are not yet there. But I think with IPOA and probably the National Police Service Commission, something is happening.
Yeah, and I think I've basically said everything I needed to say, so thank you.
Okay, last chance for the audience, if
Any last comments or questions before closing the event? Yeah, please. 1, 2, 3.
Good afternoon. My name is Abdi Kadir from Nairobi. My question goes to Abdullahi Bashir. Now, is there any moral authority by Kenya Defense Forces to continue remaining in Somalia especially when this external threat is associated with their presence in Somalia? Thanks.
My name is Kyoko. I'm from Nakuru. And sorry, every time you or concern that in all these reforms that we want to do as a country, there's always lack of a political will. A lack of a political will has almost become our Mr. Snowball, to the extent that even if the animal farm is falling down, we are still saying someone is not being responsible. But what, for instance, is the role that we can play as citizens? Do we, for instance, push for either an imagined or a real revolution?
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to press you a little bit more on the accountability of the security forces, because the first thing I did when I arrived in Kenya, I mean after settling in and all that, but reading the Constitution, and I found it was a great Constitution. Now that was a year ago. You mentioned IPOA. IPOA, did a good report on the Eastleigh cleansing and all that sort of thing. But they don't have staff. They don't get money. It's exactly like Christopher says. And basically all the independent institutions that I've been talking to basically come to us as foreigners and ask for money to be able to do their job. My instinctive feeling is, well, why should it be foreigners paying for accountability within the government of Kenya? And then I asked, well, why do you ask for money? And then they say, well, because Treasury doesn't give it to us, because Treasury thinks the donors are going to give it to you. So it sounds to me that these independent oversight authorities are deliberately not receiving money. And then the accountability is basically then to be left to foreigners, which I don't find very healthy. Especially if the government accuses the foreigners all the time of meddling into internal affairs. But at the same time, Treasury is basically asking the foreigners to meddle into internal affairs. So this is all, to me, a little bit astonishing. And I think when you say, well, you can take a complaint to IPOA, and then IPOA says, yes, we're there for that. But unfortunately, we can't do it because we don't have the money to actually, and the staff to do an investigation. Then the whole thing looks like a Potemkin village to me. So I think this accountability isn't really taken serious by the government. And I think it is one of the things which leads to the mistrust of the people in the security forces that allows them to display a high level of incompetence. You didn't, by the way, answer that question. I mean, things like, why does it take 7 hours before security forces intervene when people are massacred? Why does it take 4 or 5 days to deal with 4 people in a mall? These kind of things. This is not a matter of politicizing or anything. It's a matter of competence of the forces themselves, and everything is enshrouded in a veil of secrecy. So the lack of accountability is systematic, and it is something that the security forces are not simply resisting, but these are the things that they want to stay like that. And by the way, you're coming from the army, right? Yeah, but you were in the military, yeah. But you're talking all the time about the police, I noticed. You don't talk about your own ex-organization. So maybe you could comment on that as well a little bit. Thank you.
Let me start briefly with KDF Somalia withdrawal. I think there's been a huge debate on bringing back the KDF back to Kenya, because it's felt that since KDF went to Somalia, the number of attacks have increased in the country. And so ordinarily people will feel, bring back, and so that we don't need, so that we are not more attacked. But again, from a security perspective, and as I said before, that external threat is already internal. What assurance do we have? Al-Shabaab is not a state that we say, please come here. We are coming back from Somalia. Can you sign an MOU? And then we go back to Somalia as well. I think that's not there. So it's a bit complex in the sense that we're coming back, so Al-Shabaab, please stop your attacks. I think that level of Al-Shabaab thinking and saying the requirement is for you to move back from Somalia so we don't do any attacks is not there. So there's no guarantee in the fact that Al-Shabaab will stop the attacks once KDF pulls back. And I think somebody also mentioned, what are they doing a good job in Somalia, something like that. As I mentioned, when KDF went to Somalia, and I'm not saying this because I was a member of KDF, is they went under Operation Linda Inchi. That was purely an operation conducted by KDF through the ministry itself. And if any one of you can recall, the initial steps, the advances and the movements were very good, and they moved on completely. What happened? They were told, no, we don't have logistics, we can't support you anymore. The only way is to join AMISOM. The problem with AMISOM is that they allocate you a certain sector and say, don't operate outside this sector. And that is what's happening to KDF at the moment. So everybody has a sector, just within the same area, protect this area. And what is the mandate and role of AMISOM? Is to protect probably the government itself, not fighting Al-Shabaab. So we moved into a mandate which necessarily does not secure our border. So it's not the problem of KDF as such, but it is what they found themselves in terms of mandate within AMISOM. So if you ask me, with the role of KDF from Somalia, no, of course we need to have an exit strategy. By all means, yes, we need to at some point in time, but not simply because attacks have become more here, come back. The only way we can do is the military element also help internal affairs or internal security, because looks like the internal police elements are overwhelmed. That we agree. On the aspect of accountability, the issue of incompetence, yes. The independent commissions don't have funds. As my colleague here said, it is something deliberate probably because, I don't know, there's something with also independent commissions. They are always critical of the establishments. And that they also are almost synonymous with becoming a darling of the foreigners. So that's why they come for funds for you. The feeling is that independent commissions say, we have no money. The reason was, our reports are very critical of the government, we are doing ABCD, so that's why they come to the foreigners. But it is unfortunate. They are supposed to be independent as per the constitution and to be funded by the treasury to do effectively their job. But again, there's a lack of political will. It also comes and it's everywhere. The issue of incompetence, yes, there's a lot of incompetence. I really do not want to go back on what really happened in Westgate. It's all there. It's known. But sometimes you also look at the issue of police stations are being attacked. So that shows there's a lot of capacity issue as well. You can walk into a police station, drive, do something, and come back. So incompetence is there, yes, but I think these are some of the things that need to be addressed, and we're not shying away from the fact that it is there. So yes, the commissions are there, but I think it's upon Kenyan to say we want these commissions funded and to hold the government and other institutions accountable for the best interest of the country. Thank you.
Maybe I'd just like to address maybe two issues which strike me. I think the first has to be, just recently we had that the Auditor General saying 8 billion shillings in the Ministry of Interior cannot be accounted for now. 8 billion in just 1 year, and you can then, think about the last 10 years, how much money has been plundered. And so even the debate about underinvestment in the security sector is really an open question. Is it really underinvestment, or is it really that the persons who serve in those offices are just completely unsuitable? And I think that's a key question when we undertake police vetting, when you look at police vetting, that you find the commission going towards a focus more on lifestyle audit, because you have police officers who are in real sense, millionaires and billionaires. And so you've got to ask the question in terms of the suitability and competence and integrity of the officers who serve in these positions. I think the second one has to be that institutions must remain true to their mandate, because the calling is not that they must remain true to the government. In fact, the government is just one of the many players, but the constitution is very clear in terms of independent institutions must remain true to their mandate and must be, in fact, the more critical, the better. Because I don't know any company that's a going concern that when the auditor says, criticizes them, they say, we will not fund you as an auditor. Doesn't happen. In fact, you work towards finding out why the auditor was critical and doing a better job. That is why you're not going concern. And so the debate that if you're highly critical, we'll not give you money, I think is defeating. And I think that's the only thing I need to say.
Thank you very much. And with these last words, I would like to thank the panelists for being with us. I would like to thank the audience for their active participation. And I'd like to invite everybody to a light lunch, which is being served down there, I think, behind this building. Thank you very much for coming.